Starting in World War II and then carrying over to the time of the Vietnam War, there was a lot of debate in America on the voting age. To state the obvious, people were upset with the fact that young men were denied the right to vote but were being conscripted to fight for their country. It just didn't seem fair that that was their level of citizenship. So obviously there was a lot of public support for an amendment to go through Congress to change the voting age, and the amendment went through Congress easily. President Nixon passed it, signed it, states ratified it, so the law was passed pretty easily. It became the 26th Amendment that the voting age in America would be 18, and every American citizen of the age of 18 was allowed to vote. So at the time, obviously the United States had all these new voters, millions of new eligible voters, and it was a different time. Even though we have experienced wars today, back then the United States was more in a phase of like total war in the country because people were being conscripted. So it was a different type of war period. So the people who these new voters were extremely aware of what was going on. They were aware of current events and the policies of the different candidates. But they still needed guidance, and when Nixon passed the 26th Amendment, he addressed them with these words. He said, "The reason I believe that your generation, the 11 million new voters, will do so much for America at home is that you will infuse into this nation some idealism, some courage, some stamina, some high moral purpose that this country always needs." So these words were spoken decades ago, but they're still really important to consider today. Nixon was able to see the capacity, the capability that this new demographic possessed, and he was excited that they were becoming a part of this group that could steer the country into a new direction. And he was really doing his best to encourage them to think of themselves as important individuals with important voices. And that's something that we need to do. We need young people to feel the same support. Which brings me to my essential question, which is, when it comes to civic and political engagement, what are the responsibilities of our country's leaders in informing and inspiring young people? And so, before I begin taking apart that question, I want to first look at the terms that I use just to make sure that it's clear what I'm saying. So when I talk about engagement, I'm not really talking about what the Holderness term engagement, because at Holderness we stress engagement so much, but when you mention engagement in the real world, it's really different. It's not like going to your job on time. It's a broader thing, and it's less about you and it's more about everyone else around you. So when I'm talking about engagement, it can really mean any number of things. It can mean being aware of current events, so whether it's the presidential debates or whether it's a social event or whether it's just a national issue, if you're paying attention to those things and you know what's going on around you, then you're staying engaged. Or you could be aware of causes or caring about specific causes or working for causes, whether that be gay marriage or global warming or food production, whatever it is that you care about. If you're taking the time to do something to fight for that cause, and that's your form of being engaged. And then I said government is another form of being engaged, and by that I mean being aware of the way that our government functions, because I think that's something that not many people are aware of. So if you know what's going on in Senate or Congress, and I included this picture of Trayvon Martin because what went on with his case, so much of the controversy, pretty much all of the controversy, had to do with the Stand Your Ground law. But also, when you look at all these different things, you can see that they're kind of like intermixed. Like the Trayvon Martin thing could also be looked at, obviously, as a current event, but it could also be looked at for someone who's fighting against racism. They're fighting for a cause. So, as you can see, engagement can be separate. Kind of, there are guideposts to it, and they can kind of mix together, or they can be different. So many people can be highly aware by being engaged in all these ways, or in one of these ways, or by being engaged in current events, they're also engaged in causes, so they go together. And next I want to talk about leaders, who I'm referring to when I say leaders. So when I say leaders, I mean the people who have a lot of sway over young people, who can really change the directions of their lives just by using their influence. Politicians obviously are really important because they are the people who are passing laws or proposing tax cuts that are going to affect our generation in the future, or affect our generation right now. And then we have educators, and I think these are really important people to look at, and I will look at them a lot later on in the presentation, because educators are the people who can basically dictate how a child's life unfolds. I mean, if you have a teacher who's really inspiring to a young student who maybe isn't normally that into academics, that might propel that student into becoming really interested in that subject and going to a really good college. But if you have a teacher that doesn't engage the kid who sits in the back corner, then that kid's not really destined for a good, fulfilling life. And then the next group I want to talk about is activists. Activists are people, obviously, who are kind of working specifically toward one cause, and they have so much time to dedicate to that particular cause, and part of the time that they're using to dedicate to the cause is to kind of recruit more people, and they do that by talking to people, especially the youth, who are pretty easily influenced. I mean, at this age, we're easily influenced. And like Bill McKibben is a great example, obviously, that all of us are familiar with. He reached out to kids at Middlebury, and they started 350.org, which is now a huge organization. And then celebrities, I didn't even consider this group of people to begin with, but now I think they're so important to consider because they have so much influence in the world. They have everybody's attention, and it's really important that they use that attention in a good way. These are some of the celebrities. Ryan Gosling, he supports PETA and Invisible Children and the Enough Project. George Clooney is known for the work that he's done, his advocacy to resolve the Darfur conflict. And Angelina Jolie is just known as a humanitarian. And so these are three celebrities who are good examples of people taking all the spotlight on their role and kind of deflecting it a little bit to give attention to these important causes. And then finally, parents just have so much influence over their kids, obviously, and I think that the most important way that they use this influence, of course they don't want their kids to get into trouble, so they can use their influence over kids that way, but really just talking at the dinner table about things that are going on in the world is the best way for a kid to become interested in current events and to know what's important and to know what they should value. I mean, if a parent is stressing the importance of current events or stressing the importance of being engaged politically, then a kid's going to get that ingrained in their mind. So finally, I want to talk about who I mean when I say young people, and really that's pretty self-explanatory. I just mean us, like the high schoolers and college-age students of America. I'm going to refer to young people all throughout this presentation, and most of the stats that I use are going to talk about the age range of 18 to 29.